95% of people mistake emotional reactions for mental strength. But Epictetus knew the truth. Real mental power isn't about controlling others or conquering external challenges. It's about mastering 9 silent habits that no one will ever see you practice. 2,000 years before psychology existed, the Stoics discovered that mental weakness comes from visible effort, while true strength grows in private moments. These forgotten principles can transform your chaotic mind into an unshakable fortress, starting today. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Have you ever found yourself wide awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling while your mind races with thoughts about tomorrow's presentation, last week's awkward conversation, and that email you really should have sent? Your heart pounds in your chest, and despite the stillness of your bedroom, everything inside you feels like chaos. If this sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. This isn't weakness. It's the universal human experience that even the greatest minds in history have faced. For centuries, we've fundamentally misunderstood what mental strength really is. When you picture a mentally strong person, you likely imagine someone who never shows emotion, who powers through challenges with an unflinching face, who seems somehow immune to the doubts and anxieties that plague the rest of us. But that image is fundamentally wrong. True mental strength isn't the absence of emotion or struggle. It's the ability to navigate that struggle effectively. And this distinction is where most of us get lost. You're not alone in this midnight battle with your thoughts. Research from the American Psychological Association reveals that 73% of adults report experiencing psychological symptoms related to stress regularly, with 45% lying awake at night, just like you, because their minds won't quiet down. We're collectively struggling with an invisible battle, yet we're convinced everyone else has it figured out. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, and perhaps history's most powerful man, wrote in his private journal, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." Not exactly the confident declarations you'd expect from someone commanding the known world. But Marcus wasn't weak. He was acknowledging the reality of his mental battlefield. This emperor, who could order executions with a wave of his hand, struggled with the same mental obstacles you face. In his personal writings, never intended for publication, he repeatedly reminded himself to stop being distracted, to quit overthinking things, and to remember what was actually within his control. He needed these reminders because his mind, like yours, required constant guidance. And he wasn't alone among the great Stoics. Seneca, advisor to emperors and one of Rome's wealthiest men, openly admitted, "I am not wise, and I will not be wise." Despite being considered one of history's greatest Stoic philosophers, he acknowledged his daily battle with anger, fear, and desire. He wrote extensively about his struggles with insomnia, the same 3 a.m. battles you fight, noting how his mind would race uncontrollably when his head hit the pillow. Epictetus, born a slave before becoming a renowned teacher, built his entire philosophy around this internal struggle. "Make the best use of what is in your power," he taught, "and take the rest as it happens." His students weren't warriors training for physical battle, but ordinary people learning to navigate their mental landscape. These Stoic philosophers weren't immune to mental challenges. They simply developed effective methods to handle them. Their approach wasn't about eliminating emotions or difficulties, but about responding to them with wisdom and clarity. The latest neuroscience confirms what these ancient thinkers discovered through observation. Mental strength is built through specific habits that regulate our emotional responses. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who practice Stoic-like principles show greater resilience when facing adversity, with measurably lower levels of stress hormones and inflammatory markers. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical brain training. When you face a stressful situation, your amygdala, your brain's emotional center, activates before your prefrontal cortex, your rational thinking area. This gap, approximately 0.25 seconds, is where reactions happen before reasoned responses can form. The mentally strong haven't eliminated this gap. They've learned to navigate it skillfully. Pause this video and reflect for a moment. What was your most recent emotional reaction that you later regretted? Was it snapping at someone you love? Spiraling into anxiety over something beyond your control? Procrastinating on an important task because it felt overwhelming? I struggled with this too. When I first encountered Stoic ideas, they seemed cold and detached, hardly the solution to my racing thoughts and emotional reactions. But I've discovered, as have thousands of others, that these principles aren't about suppressing emotions, but channeling them productively. Take Sarah, for example. She's a project manager who would lie awake catastrophizing about all the ways her presentations could fail. She wasn't weak, she was human. But after implementing the 9 habits we'll discuss, she found herself focusing not on potential disasters, but on what she could actually control: her preparation, her delivery, her response to questions. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it transformed from a paralyzing force into productive energy. Or consider Michael, who would spiral into rage during his commute, letting every bad driver ruin his morning before it even began. He wasn't weak either, just caught in an automatic pattern. The techniques we'll cover helped him create space between the trigger, being cut off in traffic, and his response, turning what was once a guaranteed morning of anger into an opportunity for practicing perspective. The Stoics offer us something precious, not immunity from life's challenges, but a framework for handling them with dignity and effectiveness. Their wisdom survived 2,000 years, not because it promises an end to struggles, but because it offers a better way to face them. By the end of this video, you'll have 9 specific habits that build genuine mental strength. Not the performative kind that crumbles under pressure, but the authentic resilience that withstands life's inevitable storms. You'll discover why mental strength is primarily built through private practice rather than public display, and how to implement these habits immediately in your daily life. The transformation I'm promising isn't that you'll never again wake at 3 a.m. with anxious thoughts. Rather, when you do wake up, you'll have specific tools to address those thoughts productively instead of spiraling deeper. You'll develop what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a mental fortress that remains stable even when everything around you seems chaotic. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night with that familiar anxiety, but instead of being at its mercy, you have a toolkit of responses. You recognize the catastrophizing thoughts for what they are, just thoughts, not reality. You practice a brief present moment focus exercise that calms your nervous system. You reframe your concerns through the lens of what's actually in your control, and gradually, your mind quiets enough for you to return to sleep. This isn't fantasy. It's the practical outcome of applying Stoic principles to modern life. And the best part? You can begin building this citadel today, before this video even ends. Think about a current challenge you're facing. Perhaps it's a difficult relationship, a work situation, financial stress, or health concerns. The specific challenge doesn't matter. What matters is how you're currently responding to it. Are you spending energy on aspects you can't control? Are you allowing your emotions to drive your reactions rather than your values? Are you missing opportunities for growth because you're focused solely on comfort? These are the patterns the Stoics identified millennia ago, and their solutions remain remarkably effective today. Their approach wasn't about denying reality or suppressing emotion. It was about engaging with life's challenges in the most effective way possible. What makes these habits so powerful is that they work regardless of your circumstances. Whether you're facing major life challenges or daily irritations, the same principles apply. The mentally strong person isn't free from problems. They just have better tools for handling them. And contrary to popular belief, mental strength isn't about powering through or sucking it up. It's about responding wisely rather than reacting automatically. It's about maintaining perspective when emotions threaten to overwhelm. It's about choosing responses aligned with your deepest values rather than momentary comfort. The practices we'll explore aren't quick fixes or surface-level techniques. They're habits that, when consistently applied, transform your relationship with difficulty. Some will feel immediately helpful. Others might challenge your existing patterns. All of them have stood the test of time. As we begin this journey together, I want to emphasize one crucial point. Building mental strength is a practice, not a destination. Even Marcus Aurelius, after years of Stoic discipline, still needed to remind himself of these principles daily. The goal isn't perfection, but progress. Not eliminating struggles, but engaging with them more effectively. In the next section, we'll explore the first of our 9 habits, a morning mental preparation ritual that transforms how you face each day's challenges. This practice, which Marcus Aurelius performed before dawn each day, creates a foundation of mental readiness that makes everything else possible. But before we dive into the specific techniques, we need to understand the first powerful habit that Marcus Aurelius practiced every morning before the sun even rose. A mental preparation ritual that transformed potential disasters into simply predictable challenges. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and instead of immediately reaching for your phone to check emails, messages, or the latest catastrophic news headlines, you first take 5 minutes to prepare your mind, just like an athlete prepares their body before competition. What would change about your day? Most people begin their day in a reactive state. The alarm sounds, and within seconds, they're bombarded with information, much of it negative, all of it demanding some kind of response. Is this how a mentally strong person starts their day? The ancient Stoics would argue emphatically, no. What the Stoics practiced instead was something they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. I prefer to call it strategic anticipation. This isn't pessimism or anxiety-inducing worry, it's purposeful preparation. It's about spending 5 minutes each morning considering, what challenges might I face today, and how would my best self respond? Marcus Aurelius practiced this ritual religiously. Before the demands of running the entire Roman Empire crashed upon him each day, he would write in his journal, "Begin each day by telling yourself, 'Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness.'" This wasn't Marcus being negative, it was him being strategically prepared. Think about it. When we're caught off guard by challenges, our emotional brain takes control before our rational mind can engage. By anticipating difficulties in advance, we're programming our response before the trigger ever occurs. Neuroscience explains exactly why this works. By mentally rehearsing potential challenges, you activate your prefrontal cortex, creating neural pathways for reasoned responses before your amygdala gets triggered in the moment. A 2017 study in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience found that this type of mental preparation reduces emotional reactivity by up to 23%. That's not insignificant. It's the difference between reacting explosively and responding thoughtfully. Take Emma, for example. As a customer service representative, she used to dread difficult customers, often feeling anxious before her shift even began. Now she begins each morning visualizing challenging interactions and rehearsing calm, professional responses. "The difficult calls still come," she says, "but they no longer derail my entire day because I've already practiced handling them in my mind. This isn't about expecting the worst from life. It's about being realistically prepared so that difficulties don't catch you in reactive mode. It's the mental equivalent of bringing an umbrella after checking the weather forecast. You're not causing the rain by preparing for it. You're simply ensuring you won't get soaked if it comes. Try this right now. Pause the video and take 30 seconds to identify one potential challenge you might face today. Now imagine yourself responding not reactively, but with calm intention. What would your best self say and do? How would your body language appear? What principles would guide your response? Did you notice how this brief exercise shifted something in your thinking? That's the power of strategic anticipation. It puts you in the driver's seat of your responses, rather than leaving you at the mercy of automatic reactions. The morning preparation ritual doesn't require elaborate equipment or special training. You need only your mind and perhaps 5 minutes of undistracted time. Here's a simple structure anyone can follow. First, find a quiet moment before the day's demands begin. This might mean waking up 15 minutes earlier, or simply sitting in your car for a few minutes before entering your workplace. Second, ask yourself, what situations might challenge me today? Be specific. If you have a difficult meeting scheduled, acknowledge it. If you're likely to encounter the same frustrating traffic, name it. If a challenging conversation looms, don't pretend it won't be hard. Third, visualize yourself responding to these challenges with your values intact. See yourself maintaining composure, speaking with clarity, and acting according to your principles rather than your impulses. This practice functions like a mental GPS, programming your route before encountering obstacles. Without it, you're navigating difficult terrain without a map, making wrong turns based on momentary emotional reactions rather than your larger goals. Consider how this applies to social anxiety. Many people dread certain interactions, whether it's speaking up in meetings or attending networking events. The typical approach is to worry vaguely about these situations, which only reinforces anxiety. Instead, the Stoic approach involves specifically anticipating challenging moments and mentally rehearsing value-aligned responses. This represents one of the great paradoxes the Stoics discovered. Thinking about problems reduces their emotional impact. By facing potential difficulties in advance, you drain them of their power to ambush you. As Seneca wrote, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." For skeptics who might think this sounds too simple, consider the research. Beyond that 23% reduction in emotional reactivity I mentioned earlier, studies show that this kind of mental preparation significantly improves performance under pressure across domains from business negotiations to athletic competition. Why? Because it narrows the gap between trigger and response, giving your rational mind a head start over your emotional reactions. You might wonder how to personalize this ritual for your specific life circumstances. The beauty of this practice is its flexibility. If you're facing health challenges, your morning reflection might focus on potential pain or treatment difficulties and how you'll maintain perspective through them. If relationship tensions dominate your life, you might anticipate trigger points and practice responding with empathy rather than defensiveness. The most common mistake people make with this practice is confusing preparation with worry. Worry loops endlessly through potential problems without developing solutions. Strategic anticipation acknowledges specific challenges and immediately pivots to response planning. One leaves you drained, the other leaves you prepared. I resisted this practice myself initially. It seemed pessimistic to start my day thinking about problems. Why not just focus on positive thinking? But I discovered that blind positivity left me vulnerable when inevitable challenges arose. Strategic anticipation doesn't eliminate positive expectation. It simply ensures you're equipped for whatever comes. What surprised me most was how this practice actually reduced my anxiety. By facing potential challenges directly in a calm morning state, they lost their power to hijack my emotions later. I wasn't eliminating problems, I was eliminating their ability to derail me. You don't need fancy journals or elaborate routines to implement this habit. You can practice it while showering, during your commute, or while waiting for your morning coffee to brew. The specific time and place matter less than the consistent practice of mentally rehearsing value-based responses to anticipated challenges. Remember, this isn't about becoming paranoid or expecting disaster. It's about developing the mental equivalent of an immune system, not to prevent exposure to difficulties, but to ensure your response to them is healthy and proportionate. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." He continues, "They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." His morning practice wasn't just about anticipating difficulties, but maintaining his humanity while facing them. The subtle but profound transformation this practice creates isn't that problems disappear, it's that you are no longer caught off guard by them. The same challenges arise, but your relationship to them fundamentally changes. You move from reactive victim to responsive agent. Think about your most common emotional triggers. Perhaps it's criticism from a specific person, technology malfunctions when you're rushed, or unexpected changes to your schedule. Now imagine encountering these same triggers after having mentally rehearsed your response. The external circumstance remains identical, but your internal experience transforms completely. This practice gradually reshapes your baseline expectations. Rather than hoping for a problem-free day, which virtually guarantees disappointment, you realistically prepare for challenges while maintaining the capacity for positive engagement. As Epictetus advised, don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. The beauty of this morning ritual is how it compounds over time. The first week, you might notice slightly better responses to anticipated challenges. By the second month, you'll find yourself habitually responding rather than reacting. After a year, this orientation becomes so natural that people may comment on your seemingly unshakable composure, never knowing it comes from this simple 5-minute practice. Let me be clear about what this practice doesn't promise. It doesn't guarantee that challenging situations won't affect you emotionally. Stoicism isn't about becoming an unfeeling robot. You'll still experience frustration, disappointment, or anxiety, but these emotions won't dictate your actions. You'll feel them while choosing responses aligned with your deeper values. Perhaps most importantly, this morning ritual doesn't require extraordinary willpower or discipline. It simply requires deciding that how you respond to life's challenges matters enough to warrant 5 minutes of preparation. The barrier to entry couldn't be lower, yet the potential impact on your daily experience couldn't be higher. If you implement only one practice from this entire video, let it be this morning preparation ritual. Its simplicity belies its power. By spending 5 minutes anticipating challenges and rehearsing value-based responses, you fundamentally alter the trajectory of your day. The investment-to-return ratio is simply unmatched. I've seen this practice transform people across all walks of life. From executives preparing for high-stakes negotiations to parents anticipating challenging interactions with teenagers, the pattern is consistent. Those who mentally prepare respond effectively, those who don't react emotionally. Start small. Tomorrow morning, try this ritual for just 3 minutes. Identify 2 potential challenges and visualize responding to them with intention rather than reaction. Notice how this small act of preparation changes your relationship with those challenges when they actually arise. This isn't about controlling external events. It's about controlling your response to them. As Epictetus taught, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." The morning preparation ritual gives you a head start on this vital distinction. Now that you know how to begin your day with mental preparation, we need to address what happens when, inevitably, something triggers your emotions during the day. This is where the technique Epictetus taught for creating a small space, just 3 seconds, that can completely change your response to daily provocations. You know that split second when someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel that immediate surge of anger rising in your chest? In that moment, you have a choice, even though it doesn't feel like it. What if I told you that mastering that tiny gap between stimulus and response is where your real power lies? This is what Epictetus, a former slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers, meant when he taught that true freedom begins not with controlling external events, but with controlling our reactions to them. The space between stimulus and response is where your power lies. Mentally strong people deliberately create what I call a response gap, a brief pause between what happens and how they react. This isn't about suppressing emotions, but about creating space to choose your response rather than being hijacked by automatic reactions. Epictetus taught, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." In modern terms, don't trust your first emotional reaction. What he's telling us is revolutionary, that our initial interpretation of events isn't necessarily accurate and deserves questioning before we act on it. Think about the last time someone sent you a text message that seemed rude. Maybe it was abrupt, all caps, or just rubbed you the wrong way. Your first instinct might have been to fire back an equally curt response. But what if instead you paused for just 3 breaths? In that small space, you might remember they're in a stressful situation or simply typing quickly between meetings. That tiny gap completely changes what happens next. When something potentially upsetting occurs, mentally strong people pause and ask themselves 3 powerful questions. First, is this within my control? This immediately filters out things we can't change, saving enormous emotional energy. Second, will this matter in a year? This provides crucial perspective on what seems momentarily important. And third, what would happen if I chose not to react? This creates awareness of alternatives to automatic responses. A 2019 brain imaging study found that this momentary pause activates the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotional responses and engage higher reasoning. In other words, science confirms what the Stoics discovered through observation, that a tiny pause gives your rational brain time to catch up with your emotional brain. I know what you're thinking, but my reactions feel instantaneous. How can I possibly create this gap? The answer is practice. Like any skill, it begins awkwardly but becomes second nature with consistent application. David, a team leader in a high-pressure environment, used to immediately respond to critical emails, often escalating tensions with colleagues. Now he practices a simple 3-breath pause before responding to any message that triggers him. That tiny gap has prevented countless unnecessary conflicts, he reports. I'm responding rather than reacting. The same triggers still exist, but my relationship with them has completely changed. This isn't about becoming passive or letting people walk all over you. In fact, the response gap often leads to more effective action because it's chosen rather than automatic. As Seneca wrote, the greatest remedy for anger is delay, not permanent inaction, but strategic delay that allows wisdom to enter. Here's something you can practice right now. The next time your phone notifications sound, create a deliberate 3-second pause before checking them. Just 3 seconds. Notice the impulse to check immediately, Observe it with curiosity rather than judgment, then consciously decide when to look. This micro-habit builds the neural pathways of the response gap. You might be surprised how difficult those 3 seconds feel at first. Our reactive patterns are deeply ingrained. But remember that ancient story about Socrates? When a friend ran up to him with urgent news about someone else, Socrates stopped him and asked 3 questions. Is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? Before hearing the gossip. He was practicing the response gap 2,400 years ago. The beauty of this technique is that it works for all emotional triggers, not just anger. When anxiety strikes, the gap allows you to question catastrophic thinking. When desire tempts you towards something you'll regret, the gap creates space for your values to enter the equation. When shame spirals begin, the gap interrupts their momentum. Let me address a common objection. But some situations require immediate response. True, but fewer than we imagine. Even in emergencies, a fraction of a second to assess often leads to more effective action than blind reaction. And for the vast majority of daily triggers, the email, the comment, the traffic, a 3-second pause only helps. Think of the response gap as installing a thermostat rather than being a thermometer. Thermometers simply react to the environment, rising and falling with external conditions. Thermostats sense the temperature but respond according to a set standard. Which would you rather be? The difference between response and reaction might seem subtle, but its impact is profound. Reactions are automatic, impulsive, and often aligned with old patterns rather than current values. Responses are chosen, intentional, and aligned with who you want to be. Reactions often require apologies, responses rarely do. To build this skill, start with low-stakes situations. When the water in your shower suddenly runs cold, practice the pause. When your computer takes too long to start, notice the impatience and breathe through it. When someone takes your parking spot, create that 3-second gap before deciding how to respond. These small moments of practice prepare you for higher stakes situations. You can even practice in advance through visualization. Imagine a situation that typically triggers you. Perhaps criticism from a specific person or a particular type of disappointment. Now visualize yourself creating that pause, breathing, and choosing a response aligned with your values rather than your immediate emotional impulse. This mental rehearsal builds neural pathways that activate when the real situation occurs. I tried this with my own trigger, feeling interrupted during conversations. Typically, I'd feel irritation and either shut down or over-assert myself. By practicing the response gap, I discovered a third option, calmly noting I had more to say and asking if I could finish before hearing their thoughts. This preserved both our dignity rather than creating conflict. Here's a 7-day experiment to try. For 1 week, commit to implementing a 3-breath pause before responding to anything that triggers a negative emotion. Whether it's an email, comment, or situation, just pause and breathe 3 times before deciding how to respond. Keep a simple note of what you notice. Many people report this tiny intervention creates remarkable shifts in their emotional landscape. The response gap doesn't just change individual interactions, it gradually transforms your entire relationship with your emotional life. You begin to see emotions as information rather than commands, as passing weather rather than permanent climate. This is precisely what Epictetus meant when he said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." I want to emphasize something important. The goal isn't to eliminate emotions. Stoicism is often misunderstood as suppressing feelings, but that's a profound misreading. The aim is to experience emotions without being controlled by them. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The response gap technique aligns perfectly with modern psychological approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy. Both recognize the crucial space between trigger and response as the intervention point for lasting change. The Stoics were practicing evidence-based psychology 2 millennia before we had the research to validate it. Real-world results confirm the power of this approach. People who practice the response gap consistently report fewer conflicts, reduced stress, and fewer regrets about things said or done impulsively. One study found that people who regularly practiced response delays showed significant decreases in reactivity even in situations designed to provoke strong emotions. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from those who've transformed their lives through this practice. Consider how many regrets in your own life stem from reactions you wish you could take back versus thoughtful responses you later questioned. The gap makes all the difference. What makes this technique so powerful is its simplicity and portability. You don't need special equipment, dedicated time, or specific environments. The response gap is available to you in any situation, at any time. It's the ultimate internal tool, always accessible, impossible to lose, and completely within your control. This is why Epictetus, despite being enslaved for much of his life, could still claim profound freedom. External circumstances couldn't control his responses because he had mastered the gap between stimulus and reaction. Make the best use of what is in your power, he taught, and take the rest as it happens. As you practice the response gap, you'll notice something surprising. Creating space before responding actually saves time. Think about how much energy you've spent managing the consequences of hasty reactions, the apologies, the damaged relationships, the escalated conflicts. A 3-second investment prevents hours of cleanup. Start noticing your triggers with curiosity rather than judgment. What specific situations reliably provoke automatic reactions? For some, it's feeling disrespected. For others, it's encountering unexpected changes or delays. Knowing your particular triggers helps you prepare the response gap before you need it. Remember that implementing this technique isn't about perfection. You'll still react automatically sometimes. We all do. When that happens, simply notice it as information for next time rather than evidence of failure. The mentally strong person isn't one who never reacts, but one who keeps returning to practice even after reactions occur. The response gap becomes more powerful when combined with the morning preparation we discussed earlier. By anticipating potential triggers during your morning reflection, you're priming your brain to create that pause when the actual situation arises. These practices complement each other perfectly. I want to share a personal observation that might encourage you. The response gap gets easier with practice, but it also becomes more necessary as your awareness increases. As you become more conscious of your reaction patterns, you'll notice triggers you previously missed. This isn't backsliding, it's progress. You're becoming aware of reactions that were always happening, but below your conscious threshold. One participant in my workshop told me, "I used to think I was pretty even-tempered until I started practicing the response gap. Then I realized I was reacting constantly. I just wasn't noticing it. Now I catch myself much earlier in the process." Remember, this practice isn't about becoming passive or emotionless. It's about ensuring your actions align with your values rather than your momentary impulses. Sometimes the most value-aligned response after your pause might be setting a clear boundary or expressing justified anger, but it will be a chosen response rather than an automatic reaction. The response gap technique reveals an essential truth the Stoics understood. Freedom doesn't mean controlling external events, but mastering our internal responses. This realization is simultaneously humbling and empowering. We have less control than we wish over what happens to us, but far more control than we realize over how we respond. With consistent practice, You'll find yourself creating this gap more naturally in increasingly challenging situations. What once required conscious effort becomes a natural part of how you engage with the world. People may comment on your remarkable composure without ever knowing the simple technique behind it. The response gap represents the difference between living at the mercy of external events and living from your inner citadel. That place of calm strength the Stoics knew was available to everyone who practices this discipline. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up about things you can't control. In our hyper-connected world of instant notifications and constant stimuli, the response gap has never been more valuable or more challenging to implement. Every ping, alert, and headline is designed to trigger immediate reactions. Swimming against this current requires intention, but the alternative is living a life driven by external triggers rather than internal values. By practicing the 3-second pause, you're reclaiming your power of choice in a world designed to bypass it. You're asserting that between stimulus and response, you, not your automatic patterns, not tech algorithms, not others' expectations, will decide what happens next. The response gap is a technique, but it's also a profound philosophy of life. A commitment to living from choice rather than habit, from values rather than triggers, from wisdom rather than reactivity. The response gap technique has transformed responses to negative events. But what about when you're already in the midst of a situation that feels completely negative? This is where the next habit of the Stoics comes in. A reinterpretation technique that Seneca used when he lost everything and was exiled, transforming his greatest disaster into the opportunity that immortalized him. What if your greatest problem is actually your greatest opportunity in disguise? I know that might sound like one of those empty motivational phrases, but stay with me. When Seneca, advisor to emperors and one of Rome's wealthiest men, was suddenly exiled from Rome, stripped of his possessions, and sent to a barren island, it appeared to be the absolute destruction of his life. Yet during this exile, he wrote some of his most profound philosophical works, the very writings we still study 2,000 years later. What looked like his end became his immortality. This brings us to our third habit of mentally strong people, the perspective shift protocol, or what I like to call the reframing reflex. When facing disappointment or perceived failure, mentally strong people don't just accept the initial interpretation their mind offers. They actively search for alternative viewpoints. This isn't denial of reality, but expanding your view of it. The Stoics understood that events themselves are neutral. It's our interpretations that create suffering or opportunity. As Epictetus taught, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. This insight is revolutionary because it places power back in your hands. When something bad happens, mentally strong people ask 3 specific questions. First, what might I learn from this? This immediately transforms setbacks from pure losses into educational opportunities. Second, how might this apparent setback benefit me? This question forces your mind to search for hidden advantages. And third, what perspective would make this experience valuable? This creates distance from your initial emotional reaction. Take Jennifer's story. After losing a job she loved due to company restructuring, her first reaction was devastation. But instead of remaining stuck in that interpretation, she asked herself, what opportunities might this create? This perspective shift led her to finally start the business she'd been postponing for years. The layoff wasn't the problem, she now says. It was the solution to my hesitation. I needed that push. Research in cognitive psychology confirms the power of this approach. A Harvard study found that people who habitually reframe negative events show greater emotional regulation and problem-solving abilities. Their brains actually process setbacks differently, activating regions associated with solution finding rather than threat response. I want you to try this immediately. Think of a recent disappointment, something that didn't go as you hoped. Pause the video and write down, or just think of, 3 potential benefits or lessons this situation might eventually provide. Really do this. I'll wait. How did that feel? Did you notice a subtle shift in your emotional response to that situation? That's the reframing reflex in action. By deliberately seeking alternative interpretations, you changed your relationship with that event. This practice is like changing the frame around a picture. The picture itself, the actual event, remains exactly the same, but a different frame completely transforms how you perceive it. A disappointment framed as the universe conspiring against me creates hopelessness. The same event framed as a redirection towards something better creates possibility. Let me be clear about something important. This isn't about denying difficulties or pretending everything is wonderful when it isn't. The Stoics were realists, not delusional optimists. They acknowledged pain, loss, and challenge fully. But they understood that our initial interpretations are often unnecessarily limiting. Take health challenges, for example. If you're facing physical limitations, toxic positivity would say, just be grateful it's not worse. That's not helpful. The reframing reflex instead asks, given this reality, what opportunities might it create? What might I learn? How might this experience make me stronger in ways I haven't considered? When Paralympic athletes were surveyed about their disabilities, many reported that while they wouldn't have chosen their circumstances, they recognized how these challenges developed strengths they might never have discovered otherwise. That's not denying reality. It's expanding their interpretation of it. The difference between toxic optimism and realistic reframing is crucial. Toxic optimism denies problems exist. Reframing acknowledges problems fully while searching for constructive interpretations. One is escapism, the other is strategic perspective shifting. Seneca demonstrated this brilliantly during his exile. He wrote, "No man has ever been so far advanced by fortune that she did not threaten him as greatly as she had previously indulged him." He wasn't pretending exile was pleasant. He was finding meaning within his circumstances rather than being defined by them. A powerful technique to develop this habit is what I call reverse visualization. When facing a setback, project yourself into the future and imagine looking back at this moment. Ask yourself, 1 year from now, how might I view this situation differently? What might I be grateful for that I can't see right now? This creates psychological distance from the immediate emotional reaction. Studies show that this temporal distancing reduces the intensity of negative emotions while improving problem-solving abilities. You're not changing the situation. You're changing your relationship to it. The questions you ask yourself are incredibly powerful. When something disappointing happens, if you ask, "Why does this always happen to me?" your brain dutifully searches for evidence that you're uniquely cursed. Ask instead, "How might this redirect me towards something better?" And your brain searches for new possibilities. Let's apply this to everyday annoyances. That traffic jam that's making you late? Instead of fuming about wasted time, you might reframe it as, "This is an opportunity to listen to that podcast I've been meaning to check out," or "This gives me time to mentally prepare for my meeting." The email that criticized your work, rather than taking it as evidence of failure, you might reframe it as, "This feedback, while uncomfortable, helps me identify blind spots I couldn't see myself." The cancelled plans you were looking forward to, instead of dwelling on disappointment, you might ask, "How might this unexpected free time benefit me in ways I hadn't considered?" I challenge you to try this for 24 hours. For 1 full day, commit to reframing every obstacle you encounter. Don't suppress your initial reaction. Notice it, acknowledge it, then deliberately search for alternative interpretations. At the end of the day, note how this practice affected your emotional experience. What makes this habit so powerful is that it's not just a coping mechanism. It permanently changes how your brain processes adversity. Neuroplasticity research shows that repeated thought patterns create neural pathways that become stronger with use. By consistently practicing reframing, you're literally rewiring your brain's default response to setbacks. A client once told me, "I used to think reframing was just putting lipstick on a pig, trying to pretend bad things were good. Now I understand it's about expanding my vision to see aspects of the situation my initial reaction missed entirely." This expanded vision is what allowed Epictetus, despite being born into slavery and living with a physical disability, to create a philosophy of profound freedom. He wasn't denying his circumstances, he was refusing to let them define his inner experience. "Make the best use of what is in your power," he taught, "and take the rest as it happens." The reframing reflex becomes particularly powerful during major life transitions, career changes, relationship endings, relocations, health diagnoses. These moments typically trigger our strongest initial negative interpretations. By deliberately practicing perspective shifts, you transform potential crises into crossroads. When I was unexpectedly laid off from a job I thought was secure, my first interpretation was pure catastrophe. But when I forced myself to list potential benefits, one stood out. This creates space to pursue the writing project I've been putting off. That reframing led directly to work that proved more fulfilling than the job I lost. The practice becomes more natural with time. What starts as a deliberate exercise gradually becomes an automatic reflex. You'll find yourself spontaneously generating alternative interpretations before negative thought spirals can take hold. This doesn't mean you'll never feel disappointed or frustrated. It means those emotions no longer define your entire experience of challenging events. One objection I often hear is, "But what if my negative interpretation is accurate? What if this really is just bad?" That's a fair question. Sometimes situations are genuinely difficult with few obvious silver linings. But even then, reframing helps you distinguish between productive and unproductive suffering. Productive suffering acknowledges pain while remaining open to growth, meaning, and potential future benefits. Unproductive suffering loops endlessly in "why me?" thinking that offers no path forward. The reframing reflex doesn't eliminate suffering. It transforms it into something that can eventually serve you. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This profound insight recognizes that obstacles aren't just barriers to progress, they often become the very path to unexpected growth. A powerful way to develop this habit is through a reframing journal. Each night, identify one disappointing event from your day and write 3 potential benefits or lessons this negative event might eventually provide. Note any immediate emotional shifts this creates. Over time, you'll be amazed at how this simple practice transforms your relationship with adversity. The mentally strong don't have fewer problems than others. They just have different interpretations of those problems. They see opportunities where others see only obstacles. They find lessons where others find only failures. They discover strengths where others perceive only weaknesses. This perspective-shifting ability explains why 2 people can face identical circumstances yet have completely different experiences. The event doesn't determine your experience, your interpretation does, and your interpretation is something you can control. Remember Jennifer? 6 months after her layoff, she had built a business that provided both greater income and flexibility than her previous job. The same event that initially seemed catastrophic became the catalyst for positive transformation. The situation didn't change, her perspective did. As you practice this habit, you'll notice something remarkable. Your fear of setbacks gradually diminishes. When you trust your ability to find constructive perspectives in any situation, the future becomes less threatening. You know that whatever happens, you'll find ways to use it for growth. This doesn't mean you hope for difficulties. As Seneca wrote, "I'm not so mad as to praise adversity, but I am exploring it to find what virtue there might be in it." You still prefer things go smoothly, but you're no longer devastated when they don't. The reframing reflex gives you a superpower in a world where unexpected changes are inevitable. While others are paralyzed by disruption, you're actively searching for the hidden opportunities within it. This mental agility is invaluable in our rapidly changing world. Start small. Don't wait for major crises to practice reframing. Apply it to daily irritations, the late bus, the spilled coffee, the technology malfunction. These minor annoyances are perfect training grounds for the perspective-shifting muscle that will serve you during greater challenges. As you develop this habit, you'll find yourself automatically asking better questions when faced with disappointment. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you'll ask, "What could this be preparing me for?" Instead of, "How could I have avoided this?" you'll ask, "How can I use this?" Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate negative emotions, it's to prevent them from determining your actions and limiting your vision. You can acknowledge disappointment while simultaneously exploring constructive interpretations. This emotional agility is a hallmark of mental strength. The reframing reflex transforms not just individual situations, but your entire relationship with adversity. What once seemed like meaningless suffering becomes valuable training. What looked like bad luck becomes redirection towards something better. What felt like failure becomes feedback for growth. While reinterpreting difficulties is powerful, the Stoics went beyond mental techniques. They deliberately sought discomfort as a form of training. This counterintuitive practice, which Seneca called the rehearsal of poverty, might seem strange at first, but its ability to transform your relationship with everyday discomfort is simply extraordinary. Why would Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, occasionally sleep on a hard floor and eat only plain bread for days? This question might seem strange at first, but his answer reveals a profound insight into mental strength that most modern self-help approaches completely miss. Seneca wasn't punishing himself. He was training his mind through what I call deliberate hardship training. While our culture celebrates comfort and convenience at every turn, mentally strong people regularly embrace voluntary discomfort. This isn't masochism or pointless suffering. It's strategic mental conditioning. Think of it as taking your mind to the psychological gym, where you deliberately lift the weights of difficulty to build resilience muscles. The Stoics understood a paradox that neuroscience has only recently confirmed. Voluntary discomfort reduces involuntary suffering. When you regularly expose yourself to controlled challenges, your tolerance for all discomfort increases. As Seneca explained his practice, set aside certain days on which you will be content with the most basic food and the roughest clothing. Ask yourself, is this what I feared? This approach isn't just ancient wisdom, it's backed by modern science. Research on hormesis, beneficial stress, shows that controlled exposure to discomfort builds psychological resilience, similar to how physical stress through exercise builds stronger muscles. Just as your body adapts to weightlifting by growing stronger, your mind adapts to voluntary challenges by becoming more resilient. What might this practice look like in your everyday life? You don't need to sleep on the floor like Seneca, though you could try it. Start with accessible challenges, taking cold showers, fasting for 16 hours, having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding, or tackling your most challenging task first thing in the morning instead of procrastinating. Thomas, a software developer who struggled with stress and anxiety, started taking cold showers every morning. It's 3 minutes of controlled discomfort that makes uncontrolled discomforts easier to handle, he explains. After starting my day by voluntarily doing something difficult, other challenges seem less intimidating. That meeting I was dreading, it's nothing compared to the cold water I chose to endure. Remember, the purpose isn't suffering for suffering's sake. The goal is to strengthen your discomfort muscle so that when life inevitably throws challenges your way, a project deadline, a health setback, financial pressure, you already have practice facing discomfort with equanimity. The beauty of voluntary discomfort is that it's entirely under your control. You choose the challenge, its intensity, and its duration. This controlled exposure creates confidence that spills over into every area of life. As Epictetus taught his students, difficulties show men what they are. In case of any difficulty, remember that God has pitted you against a rough antagonist that you may be a conqueror. I know what you might be thinking. Isn't life hard enough already? Why would I deliberately make things more difficult? It's a fair question, but consider this. The discomfort you choose is fundamentally different from the discomfort that chooses you. When you voluntarily embrace a challenge, you're developing agency rather than victimhood. You're saying, I can handle difficult things by choice, which builds confidence for handling difficult things by necessity. Try this small challenge right now. If you're sitting, stand up. If you're already standing, do 5 push-ups or hold a plank position for 20 seconds. Notice your mind's immediate resistance to this voluntary discomfort. That resistance is exactly what we're training to overcome. Did you actually do it? If not, that's valuable information about how strongly your mind seeks comfort. If you did, notice how quickly the discomfort passed and perhaps even left you feeling more energized. This micro-experience demonstrates the core principle of voluntary hardship. The science behind this practice is fascinating. When you deliberately expose yourself to manageable stresses, your body releases hormones that actually strengthen your nervous system's resilience. A 2018 study found that regular exposure to moderate, controlled stress significantly improved participants' emotional regulation during unexpected challenges. Social anxiety provides a perfect example of how this works. If you fear public speaking, deliberately volunteering for presentations creates controlled exposure that gradually reduces anxiety. Eleanor, who once had paralyzing fear before speaking to groups, began regularly volunteering for opportunities to present. The voluntary discomfort was far less intense than the avoidance anxiety had been, she discovered. By choosing the discomfort, I transformed it from something that controlled me into something I controlled. This practice also creates what psychologists call an expanded comfort zone. Imagine your comfort zone as a circle. Outside that circle lies your growth zone, and beyond that, your panic zone. By regularly stepping into your growth zone through voluntary challenges, you expand the diameter of your comfort zone. What once seemed difficult gradually becomes routine. Seneca understood this psychological principle when he wrote about his own practice. I am not so mad as to crave illness, but if I must suffer illness, I will crave that I do nothing self-indulgent because of it. It is not hardships that are the problem, but not being able to bear hardships. Think about something uncomfortable you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a difficult conversation, a challenging workout, or even something simple like turning off your phone for an entire evening. What if you voluntarily embrace that discomfort today? Not because you have to, but specifically because it's uncomfortable. I've personally found cold showers to be a remarkably effective practice. My first attempt lasted maybe 10 seconds and involved a lot of gasping and internal negotiation. Now 3 minutes feels manageable. What surprised me wasn't just that I could handle the physical discomfort, but how it changed my relationship with other discomforts throughout the day. Small annoyances that would have previously triggered frustration now seem trivial compared to the deliberate challenge I chose. This effect creates a profound shift in your relationship with difficulties. When you regularly choose hard things, unchosen hardships lose much of their power over you. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Difficulties transform from obstacles into opportunities for practicing resilience. Let's be practical about implementing this habit. Start small. The goal isn't to break yourself, but to gradually strengthen your discomfort tolerance. Choose one minor comfort to temporarily sacrifice this week. Perhaps it's sugar in your coffee, hot showers, or the elevator instead of stairs. The specific discomfort matters less than the practice of voluntarily embracing it. After a week of this smaller challenge, consider adding something slightly more difficult. Maybe a 24-hour fast, a day of speaking to no one about yourself, or completing a challenging physical activity. With each progressive challenge, you're building not just tolerance for discomfort, but confidence in your ability to handle whatever life throws your way. One powerful aspect of this practice is how it reduces what the Stoics called the fear of fear itself. Much of our suffering comes not from discomfort, but from our anticipatory anxiety about potential discomfort. By regularly exposing yourself to challenges, you discover that the reality of discomfort is rarely as bad as the fear of it. As Seneca noted after his voluntary poverty exercises, "The things we were afraid to lose turn out to be much easier to do without than we thought." The Stoics recognized something that modern psychology confirms. Adversity reveals capacity. You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. Voluntary discomfort gives you regular practice at discovering this strength before circumstances force the lesson upon you. Remember that even small discomforts count, sitting with boredom instead of immediately reaching for your phone, listening fully to someone without formulating your response while they speak, eating plain foods without added flavors for a day. These seemingly minor challenges train the same mental muscles that major life difficulties will test. The practice of voluntary discomfort gradually transforms your internal narrative from "I can't handle this" to "I've handled difficult things before and can do so again." This narrative shift is perhaps the most valuable outcome of all. I've noticed that people often resist this practice the most vehemently, yet report the most significant benefits once they implement it. There's something profoundly liberating about discovering that your well-being doesn't depend on external comfort. As Epictetus, who endured slavery and disability, taught, freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. This doesn't mean eliminating all pleasure. The Stoics weren't ascetics who rejected life's enjoyments. It means breaking the psychological dependency on comfort that makes discomfort seem intolerable. When you can take or leave comfort, you've achieved a kind of freedom that no external circumstance can remove. The spillover effect of this practice is remarkable. A client who began with cold showers reported that difficult conversations at work became easier. Another who practiced fasting found her ability to focus during challenging projects improved. The specific discomfort you choose trains a general capacity for equanimity. Seneca captured this perfectly. The soul should know beforehand the hardships it will have to endure, and should strengthen itself by reflecting upon them. Don't you see how athletes train themselves before competition? They sweat in training, they exert themselves, they tire themselves, and yet they do all this to prepare for only a few moments in the arena. Consider your own life as that arena. The challenges you face, professional setbacks, relationship difficulties, health concerns, are your competitive moments. Voluntary discomfort is your training ground, preparing you to perform with excellence when it matters most. Let me address a common misunderstanding. This practice isn't about becoming hardened or insensitive. Quite the opposite. It's about developing the capacity to remain open, compassionate, and effective, even when circumstances are difficult. The goal isn't to feel less, but to function well regardless of what you feel. As you experiment with voluntary discomfort, maintain a spirit of curiosity rather than self-punishment. Notice what happens in your body and mind when you embrace challenges. How does your relationship with discomfort change? Where do you resist? What stories does your mind create to avoid difficulty? These observations themselves build self-knowledge that serves you in all areas of life. One final thought on this practice: voluntary discomfort builds appreciation. When you temporarily remove comforts, their return brings renewed gratitude. As Seneca noted after his own exercises in voluntary poverty, "The man who has endured all things that seemed hardships beforehand emerges more joyful from them." While voluntary discomfort strengthens your resilience for future challenges, there's another practice that transforms your experience of the present moment. It's a technique Marcus Aurelius called your own retreat within, a way to find peace even in the midst of chaos that requires no formal meditation or specific time of day. Have you ever noticed how it's possible to be physically in one place but mentally somewhere completely different? You're sitting in a meeting, but your mind is replaying yesterday's argument. You're having dinner with someone you love, but your thoughts are stuck on tomorrow's deadline. Your body occupies one space while your mind inhabits another entirely. This mental time traveling is so common we barely notice it, yet it might be costing us more than we realize. When we're caught in mental time travel, we miss the only moment we can actually experience, right now. The Stoics recognized this fundamental truth long before modern psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius offered this profound advice: give yourself a gift, the present moment. People look for retreats for themselves in the country, by the coast, or in the hills. But this is altogether in your own power. Your own retreat can be whenever you desire, by looking inward. What Marcus understood is that peace isn't found in changing our external circumstances, but in changing our relationship with the present moment. This is what I call the present moment anchor, the practice of deliberately bringing your full attention to what is directly before you, rather than being lost in thoughts about the past or future. The science behind this approach is compelling. Neurological research confirms that present moment focus activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing stress hormones and increasing cognitive function. A Yale study found that mind wandering correlates strongly with unhappiness, while present moment attention correlates with well-being. In fact, researchers discovered that people's minds wander nearly 50% of their waking hours, and this wandering mind is predictive of unhappiness, regardless of what activity they're engaged in. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical brain training with measurable benefits. When you anchor yourself in the present moment, you're not just feeling better temporarily. You're actually changing your brain's default mode of operation. Richard, an attorney with a high-stress practice, began implementing what he calls micro-mindfulness, 30-second periods of complete attention to his breathing whenever he transitions between tasks. "I'm not meditating for hours," he says, "just repeatedly bringing myself back to now throughout the day. The cumulative effect has been transformative. I'm handling the same caseload with far less mental exhaustion." What makes this practice so powerful is its accessibility. You don't need special equipment, dedicated time, or specific environments. Present moment anchoring can happen anywhere, anytime, while washing dishes, walking to your car, or waiting in line at the store. The only requirement is your attention. Try this right now. For the next 20 seconds, completely focus on your breathing. Notice the sensation of air moving in and out of your body. Feel the rising and falling of your chest. When thoughts arise, and they will, gently return your attention to your breath. Don't worry about doing it perfectly. Just notice when your mind wanders and bring it back. How was that? Did you notice how quickly your mind wanted to drift away from something as simple as your breath? That's normal. Our minds are designed to plan, remember, and problem solve. The key insight is that while thinking is useful for specific purposes, we don't need to be thinking all the time. Present moment anchoring isn't about eliminating thought. It's about choosing when to think, rather than being hijacked by automatic thought patterns. Epictetus captured this distinction perfectly. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Your thoughts are in your power, external events often are not. By anchoring in the present, you're exercising the power you actually have rather than exhausting yourself with what you don't. Think of your mind as an ocean. Thoughts and emotions are like waves on the surface, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, always changing. Present moment anchoring is like diving beneath those waves to the still waters below. The waves continue above, but you access a calm that isn't dependent on the surface conditions. This practice becomes particularly valuable during challenging emotions. When anxiety strikes, your mind typically projects into an imagined future. When regret or resentment appears, your mind dwells in an unchangeable past. In both cases, you're mentally leaving the only moment where you have actual agency, right now. Try this approach next time you feel overwhelmed. Instead of fighting the emotion or getting lost in its story, simply notice where you feel it in your body. Is there tightness in your chest? A knot in your stomach? Heat in your face? Bring your full attention to the physical sensation without judging it or needing to change it. Just observe with curiosity. This present moment anchoring often reveals that emotions, when directly experienced rather than mentally elaborated, naturally shift and change on their own. Rachel, an emergency room nurse, implemented this during her chaotic shifts. Those tiny moments of presence became islands of calm that sustained me through the chaos, she explains. I'm handling the same situations with far less emotional drainage. When things get overwhelming, I focus completely on the specific task in front of me rather than the 12 things waiting afterward. Paradoxically, I get everything done with less stress. This points to a counterintuitive truth. Present moment anchoring actually improves productivity rather than hindering it. Research on multitasking consistently shows that attempting to do multiple things simultaneously reduces effectiveness in all of them. By contrast, full presence with one task at a time, what psychologists call flow state, leads to both higher quality work and greater satisfaction. A simple way to build this habit is to set what I call presence prompts throughout your day, regular reminders to return to the present moment. You might set an hourly reminder on your phone labeled simply "Now." When it sounds, take 30 seconds to notice 3 specific sensory details in your immediate environment, then return to your activity with renewed focus. You can also use transitional moments as natural presence prompts. Each time you walk through a doorway, wash your hands, or get in your car, use that as a trigger to take 3 conscious breaths. These micro-practices accumulate throughout your day, gradually shifting your mind's default setting from wandering to present. I know what you might be thinking. I don't have time to stop and be present. I have too much to do. This objection itself reveals a misconception about presence. Being present doesn't require stopping your activities. It means bringing full attention to the activity you're already doing. You can wash dishes mindfully, have conversations mindfully, even complete work tasks mindfully. The change is in the quality of attention, not the external activity. In fact, present moment anchoring often reveals how much time we actually waste through mind wandering. How many times have you read a page in a book only to realize you didn't absorb any of it because your mind was elsewhere? How often have you missed parts of a conversation because you were mentally rehearsing your response? The time cost of presence is an illusion. Presence actually gives you time back by eliminating these inefficiencies. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote, "Concentrate every minute on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, tenderly, willingly, with justice. Free yourself from all other distractions." Yes, you can, if you do everything as if it were the last thing you were doing in life. Notice how Marcus connects presence with meaning. When you're fully engaged with what you're doing, whether it's writing an email, having a conversation, or simply drinking a glass of water, that activity takes on a different quality. Ordinary moments become extraordinary through the quality of your attention. The 5 senses technique is particularly effective for quickly anchoring in the present. Wherever you are, notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This simple exercise pulls you immediately into present moment awareness through your sensory experience. I've seen people use this effectively before important presentations, during anxiety attacks, or simply as a regular reset throughout their day. What makes present moment anchoring so powerful is its cumulative effect. Each individual instance might seem small, but together they create a fundamental shift in your relationship with your experience. It's like working out. A single push-up doesn't transform your fitness, but a consistent practice over time creates profound change. And like physical exercise, present moment anchoring gets easier with practice. What begins as a deliberate effort gradually becomes more natural. You'll find yourself spontaneously noticing when you're caught in rumination and choosing to return to the present without elaborate techniques. Remember that this practice isn't about achieving some perfect state of constant presence. Our minds naturally time travel, and that capacity serves important purposes. The goal is developing the awareness to notice when mind wandering isn't serving you, and the ability to return to the present when that's more valuable. The distinction between presence and passivity is also important. Being present doesn't mean accepting whatever happens without response. In fact, presence enables more effective action because you're responding to what's actually happening, rather than to your mental projections about it. As Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. I want to emphasize something important. Present moment anchoring isn't just another task on your to-do list. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to all your tasks. It's the difference between living your life and thinking about your life, between experiencing your relationships and evaluating them, between being wherever you are and wishing you were somewhere else. This shift has profound implications for how we experience difficulties. When you're fully present with a challenge, whether physical pain, emotional distress, or a complex problem, you engage with what's actually there rather than with your added layers of interpretation, resistance, and elaboration. This often reveals that the primary difficulty isn't the situation itself, but your mind's response to it. Seneca understood this when he wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." By anchoring in the present moment, you cut through imagination's elaborate catastrophes and deal with reality as it actually is, which is almost always more manageable than your mind's projections. As you practice present moment anchoring, you might notice something surprising. Time seems to expand. When you're fully engaged with what you're doing rather than mentally rushing to the next thing, moments seem richer and more spacious. This is what psychologists call temporal abundance, a sense that time is sufficient rather than scarce. Michael, who struggled with chronic time pressure, implemented regular present moment practices. "I'm busier than ever," he notes, "but I no longer feel rushed. By being fully in each moment rather than mentally in the next 3, time somehow expands. I'm accomplishing more while feeling less hurried." The present moment anchor transforms not just your internal experience, but your connections with others. Think about how it feels when someone is really listening to you versus when they're physically present but mentally elsewhere. Presence is perhaps the greatest gift we can offer each other, yet it's becoming increasingly rare in our distraction-filled world. Try this experiment. In your next conversation, commit to being fully present. Put away your phone, Set aside your mental to-do list and really listen. Not just to the words, but to the person behind them. Notice their facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. When your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring it back to the person before you. Afterward, notice the quality of that interaction compared to your typical conversations. Present moment anchoring is a simple practice, but don't mistake simplicity for insignificance. In a world designed to fracture your attention and pull you away from now, the ability to anchor yourself in the present moment might be the most valuable skill you can develop. The present moment anchor transforms how you experience your day-to-day life. But for important decisions that shape your future, the Stoics had a specific framework based on something very different from outcomes or emotional comfort. It's an approach that instantly clarifies difficult choices and is centered on the 4 virtues that guided all of Epictetus's decisions. Have you ever faced a difficult decision where no option seemed clearly right? Perhaps you were torn between a job that offers financial security and one that aligns with your values. Or maybe you needed to decide whether to have a difficult conversation with someone, knowing it might damage the relationship, but also knowing that silence wasn't serving either of you. In these moments, how do you decide what to do when the outcomes are uncertain? While most people make decisions based on predicted outcomes or emotional comfort, mentally strong people approach choices differently. They filter decisions through what I call a virtue-centered decision framework. This approach, rooted in Stoic philosophy, offers clarity precisely when outcomes are most uncertain. The Stoics recognize that while we can't control results, we can always control the values that guide our choices. They identified 4 core virtues that should direct all decisions: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Before making important decisions, mentally strong people ask themselves 4 specific questions based on these virtues. First, regarding wisdom, what is the most truthful perspective here? This question cuts through emotional distortions and cognitive biases to see the situation clearly. Second, regarding courage, what action requires appropriate bravery? Notice the word appropriate. This isn't about recklessness, but about facing necessary discomfort. Third, regarding justice. What serves fairness and humanity? This considers how your decision affects others and the common good. And fourth, regarding temperance. What demonstrates appropriate self-discipline? This helps you balance between extremes and maintain long-term perspective. Epictetus taught his students, first say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. This virtue-centered approach provides direction when outcomes are uncertain, which, if we're honest, is most of the time in our complex world. Think about a difficult decision you're facing right now. Perhaps you're considering a career change, navigating a relationship challenge, or deciding whether to take a risk. Rather than exclusively focusing on potential outcomes, which you can't fully control, try applying the virtue framework. Wisdom asks, am I seeing this situation clearly, without distortion from fear or wishful thinking? What information am I missing? What would the wisest person I know advise? Courage asks, am I avoiding this option simply because it's uncomfortable? What would brave action look like here? Am I confusing comfort with actual safety? Justice asks, how will this decision affect others? Does it align with treating people fairly? Does it contribute positively to my community? Temperance asks, does this choice represent balance and appropriate restraint? Am I being pulled toward extremes? How will this decision affect my long-term well-being? Modern research on values-based decision-making confirms the power of this approach. Studies show that alignment between actions and core values significantly reduces decision anxiety and increases satisfaction with choices, even when outcomes aren't ideal. One 2019 study found that people who made major life decisions based primarily on their values reported higher life satisfaction 2 years later, regardless of how the specific situations turned out. Michelle's story illustrates this perfectly. Facing a difficult career decision between a higher-paying corporate position and a lower-paying role at a non-profit aligned with her values, she initially spent weeks anxiously analyzing potential outcomes, salary projections, advancement opportunities, job security scenarios. This analysis paralysis left her increasingly stressed and no closer to a decision. When she shifted to the virtue framework, asking which choice best reflected who she wanted to be rather than what might happen, clarity emerged quickly. "I realized I was afraid of the right choice because it was harder," she explains. The virtue-centered questions made it obvious that while the corporate job offered more money, the non-profit role would allow me to express courage, justice, and wisdom in ways deeply important to me. Once I focused on who I wanted to be, rather than what might happen, the decision became clear. This doesn't mean Michelle's choice was easy, or that the outcome was guaranteed. It means her decision aligned with her deepest values, creating internal harmony regardless of external results. Let's practice applying this framework to a common situation. Imagine you need to have a difficult conversation with someone about a behavior that's affecting your relationship. The outcome-focused approach asks, will this conversation fix the problem? Will they get defensive? Will this make things worse? These questions are impossible to answer with certainty beforehand. The virtue-centered approach instead asks, wisdom. What's the most truthful perspective on this situation? Courage. Does this require appropriate bravery on my part? Justice. What would be fair to both myself and the other person? Temperance. How can I approach this with appropriate self-discipline rather than impulsive emotion? These questions don't guarantee a specific outcome, but they do guarantee you'll act in alignment with your highest values. Whether the conversation works becomes secondary to whether you showed up as the person you aspire to be. This shift from outcome focus to virtue focus transforms the entire experience of decision-making. When decisions are based solely on predicted outcomes, you're constantly vulnerable to anxiety because you can never control results with certainty. When decisions are based on expressing virtues, you always have the power to succeed regardless of external factors. To make this practical, try creating what I call a virtue decision journal. Before making significant choices, write down the 4 virtue questions and your honest answers. This short reflection often reveals clarity that endless pro-con lists never provide. I implemented this practice when deciding whether to address a conflict with a close friend. My outcome-focused mind was terrified. What if they reject my perspective? What if this ends the friendship? What if I make things worse? These fears kept me silent for months. When I finally applied the virtue framework, I realized that wisdom required acknowledging the truth of the situation. Courage meant facing the discomfort of potential rejection. Justice meant giving both my friend and myself the opportunity for authentic relationship. And temperance meant approaching the conversation with calm clarity rather than accumulated resentment. The conversation itself was still difficult, but I felt a profound inner alignment regardless of how my friend might respond. This internal coherence, where your actions match your values, creates a sense of peace that transcends specific outcomes. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly in his private journal. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Notice he doesn't say, if it doesn't produce good results, or if it makes people unhappy. His decision criteria focused entirely on virtue. Pause for a moment and consider a decision you're currently facing. Rather than focusing solely on outcomes, ask which option best expresses wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Write down or mentally note your answers. Notice how this shifts your perspective on the choice before you. Did you feel the difference? Many people report an immediate sense of clarity when they shift from outcome prediction, which is always speculative, to virtue expression, which is always within their control. This approach is particularly valuable for major life decisions, career changes, relationship commitments, ethical dilemmas. But it also transforms daily choices. Should you speak up in that meeting? Should you set a boundary with that person who consistently oversteps? Should you take on that new responsibility? The virtue framework provides guidance regardless of the scale of the decision. One important distinction: virtue-centered decision-making isn't about moral perfectionism or rigid rules. It's about alignment with your highest values. For example, courage might look different for different people in different situations. For someone with social anxiety, speaking up in a group might require tremendous courage. For someone else, the courageous choice might be listening instead of dominating the conversation. The framework is also flexible across cultures and personal beliefs. While the Stoics named these specific virtues, the underlying principle works with any deeply held values. The key is moving from outcome prediction to value expression as your primary decision criterion. This approach transforms not just individual decisions, but your entire relationship with choice and agency. When outcomes determine success, you're constantly at the mercy of factors beyond your control. When virtue determines success, you always have the power to succeed through your choices, regardless of external results. Think about how this might transform your experience of failure. If success is defined as achieving specific outcomes, failure is inevitable because we can't control all variables. But if success is defined as acting with virtue, failure becomes simply valuable feedback that informs future choices while your sense of internal worth remains intact. This doesn't mean outcomes don't matter. Of course they do. The Stoics weren't detached from practical results. They simply recognized that basing your well-being on things you can't control creates unnecessary suffering, while focusing on what you can control, your values and choices, creates resilience and peace. A common objection to this approach is that it might seem too abstract for practical decision-making. But the opposite is true. Outcome prediction is what's truly abstract. It involves imagining countless scenarios that haven't happened yet and may never happen. Virtue expression is concrete and immediate. It asks only, who do I want to be in this moment? Another objection might be, but what if following virtues leads to bad outcomes? This misunderstands the approach. Wisdom includes practical consideration of likely consequences. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Justice without temperance becomes rigid ideology. The virtues work together as an integrated system of decision-making, not as isolated principles. For 4 days, try implementing the virtue-centered decision framework for every significant choice you face. Before deciding, ask the 4 questions based on the Stoic virtues. Notice how this affects not just the quality of your decisions, but your experience of making them. Many people report less anxiety and greater confidence even when facing complex choices. Remember Paul from earlier? He was facing a difficult choice between 2 job offers and getting lost in endless comparisons of benefits packages, potential advancement paths, and salary projections. This analysis was creating paralysis rather than clarity. When he shifted from comparing what he might get to considering who he might become, the decision became clear. The higher-paying role would have required compromising my integrity in ways I wasn't comfortable with, he explains. The virtue framework helped me recognize that what looked like the better choice on paper wasn't better for who I aspired to be. The virtue-centered decision framework doesn't eliminate difficult choices. It clarifies them. It doesn't guarantee easy paths. It ensures meaningful ones. And it doesn't promise specific outcomes. It creates internal coherence regardless of external results. As you practice this approach, you might notice something surprising. Decisions become simultaneously more serious and less stressful. More serious because you're engaging with your deepest values rather than superficial preferences. Less stressful because you're focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't. This balance of seriousness and serenity characterized the Stoic approach to life. They understood that while we can't control much of what happens to us, we always control how we respond. The virtue-centered decision framework puts this philosophy into practical action, transforming how you navigate life's endless choices. While the virtues guide us in major decisions, there's a practice the Stoics use to instantly clarify what really matters in daily life. It seems morbid at first glance, but it's actually profoundly life-affirming. The practice Seneca called balancing life's books each day, consciously remembering our mortality. It seems morbid, but what if the key to living fully was regularly remembering that you will die? This question might make you uncomfortable. Most of us avoid thinking about our mortality at all costs. Yet the Stoics discovered something counterintuitive. Consciously contemplating death doesn't diminish life's joy, it dramatically enhances it. While most people distract themselves from this fundamental reality, mentally strong people practice what the Stoics called memento mori. Remember you must die. I prefer to call it mortality motivation. This isn't a depressing fixation, but a clarifying lens that instantly reveals what truly matters. Seneca, who advised emperors and experienced both extreme wealth and exile, wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time." This isn't philosophical abstraction, it's practical advice for living with urgency and meaning. Think about how you behave on the last day of vacation. You're fully present, savoring experiences, less bothered by minor inconveniences. Why? Because awareness of limited time transforms how you experience it. Mortality awareness brings this same quality of attention to everyday life. Research on mortality salience confirms that healthy contemplation of death paradoxically increases life satisfaction and reduces anxiety about trivial matters. A 2017 study in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that regular reflection on mortality significantly increased gratitude and life appreciation while decreasing concern with status and material possessions. James, who struggled with constant worry, began asking himself each morning, "If this were my last day, would I spend it worrying about what I'm worrying about?" This simple practice dramatically reduced his anxiety about small matters and increased his focus on meaningful activities. "Most of my worries instantly revealed themselves as insignificant when viewed through this lens," he explains. "I still plan responsibly for the future, but I'm no longer consumed by things that won't matter in the larger story of my life." This practice acts like a priority filter, instantly separating the essential from the trivial. Imagine applying this perspective to your current concerns. Ask yourself, if I had only 1 year left, what would I stop doing immediately? What would I start doing? Take a moment right now to answer these questions honestly. Did certain activities or concerns suddenly seem absurdly unimportant? Did other priorities, perhaps relationships, creative pursuits, or meaningful work, move to the forefront? This shift in perspective isn't about becoming morbid, but about becoming clear. The Stoics used memento mori not to create fear, but to eliminate it. When you confront the finite nature of life directly, many everyday anxieties simply dissolve. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't pessimism, but pragmatic clarity. Many people misunderstand this practice, assuming it creates gloom or detachment. The opposite is true. When you acknowledge life's temporary nature, you experience it more fully. Colors seem brighter, conversations more meaningful, simple pleasures more profound. As Epictetus taught, keep death and exile before your eyes each day, along with everything that seems terrible. By doing this, you'll never have a base thought, nor will you desire anything excessively. Consider how this practice transforms your relationship with procrastination. When we imagine unlimited time, postponing important actions seems reasonable. Under the lens of mortality awareness, procrastination becomes a genuine tragedy, trading irreplaceable life for trivial distractions. Try this visualization. Imagine you've just received news that you have exactly 1 year to live. You'll remain healthy until near the end, but your time is definitively limited. How would your priorities shift today? What conversations would you no longer delay? What experiences would you prioritize? What grudges would you release as suddenly meaningless? A powerful way to implement this practice is through what I call a mortality meditation. Once weekly, spend 5 minutes contemplating the reality that your life is finite. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's acknowledging the concrete reality we all face, but rarely consider consciously. Ask yourself, am I using my limited time in ways aligned with what I value most? What adjustments would create a life I wouldn't regret? James began this practice after losing a close friend unexpectedly. I used to think contemplating death would be depressing, he shares, but it's been the opposite. It clarifies everything. When I'm caught in trivial frustrations, traffic, minor slights, inconveniences, I ask myself, will this matter when I'm on my deathbed? The answer is almost always no, and my perspective immediately shifts. The science behind this approach reveals something fascinating. Researchers studying post-traumatic growth have found that people who face mortality through illness or near-death experiences often report profound positive life changes. They reprioritize relationships, find greater meaning in ordinary experiences, and report increased psychological well-being. The mortality awareness practice allows us to access these benefits without requiring the actual trauma. A 2018 neurological study found that contemplating mortality activates brain regions associated with meaning-making and personal value processing. This explains why this practice feels simultaneously sobering and liberating. It engages the parts of our brain responsible for evaluating what truly matters to us individually. The key distinction is between unhealthy and healthy mortality awareness. Unhealthy awareness manifests as anxiety or morbid obsession. Healthy awareness acknowledges death matter-of-factly as the natural boundary that gives life its preciousness. As Seneca noted, life is long if you know how to use it. Mortality awareness helps us use it well. This practice transforms seemingly small decisions. Should you have that heartfelt conversation you've been postponing? Under mortality awareness, the answer becomes clearer. Should you spend another evening scrolling mindlessly through social media? The perspective of limited time makes alternatives more compelling. Should you pursue that meaningful project despite the risk of failure? Mortality awareness often reveals that the greater risk is not trying at all. Steve Jobs, who faced his own mortality through illness, expressed this perfectly. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. You might be thinking, this sounds important but also uncomfortable. How do I start? Begin with small daily reminders rather than extended contemplation. Some people keep a memento mori coin in their pocket. Others set a daily reminder asking, if this were my last year, would today's priorities change? The specific method matters less than the regular practice of considering your finite time. When I first encountered this practice, I resisted it strongly. Why dwell on something unavoidable and potentially upsetting? But after implementing it cautiously, I discovered what the Stoics knew. Far from diminishing life, mortality awareness expands it. The same 24 hours feel entirely different when approached as the precious, non-renewable resource they actually are. This perspective transforms how we experience challenges too. Much of our suffering comes from believing difficulties shouldn't happen to us or will last forever. Mortality awareness contextualizes problems within the broader arc of a finite life. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have existed as part of the whole for so many years, but soon you will disappear into what produced you." This cosmic perspective doesn't minimize legitimate suffering, but places it within a frame that makes it more manageable. The same challenge viewed as "this terrible thing happening to me forever" versus "a difficult chapter in my finite story" creates entirely different emotional experiences. The mortality awareness practice particularly transforms three areas: relationships, purpose, and presence. With relationships, it cuts through petty conflicts and focuses attention on what matters, expressing love, resolving important issues, spending quality time. Ask yourself, if I knew my time with this person was limited, which it is, what would I prioritize in our relationship? Regarding purpose, it challenges postponement of meaningful work. Many people delay their most important contributions, assuming future decades will provide opportunity. Mortality awareness asks, what if the time is now? What contribution might you regret not making? And for presence, it transforms ordinary moments from background noise into the actual substance of life. That cup of tea, conversation with a friend, or quiet evening isn't just passing time until something important happens. It is the important happening. Try this exercise now. Identify one relationship, one purposeful project, and one daily experience that would become priorities if you truly embraced the finite nature of your life. Commit to acting on each of these within the next week. Mortality awareness also clarifies decision-making in surprising ways. When weighing options, ask, which choice would I be more likely to regret not making when looking back at my life? This perspective often reveals that the path of courage, while difficult, prevents the deeper regret of never having tried. Some worry this practice might lead to hedonism or irresponsibility. If life is short, why not just pursue pleasure? But those who implement it consistently report the opposite effect. Awareness of life's brevity typically increases commitment to meaningful legacy and contribution rather than momentary indulgence. As Seneca observed, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. I've noticed that people initially resistant to this practice often become its strongest advocates once they experience its effects. The initial discomfort gives way to a peculiar freedom, the freedom that comes from facing what we most fear and discovering it actually liberates rather than constrains us. The mortality awareness practice doesn't eliminate fear of death, but it transforms our relationship with that fear. Rather than an unconscious anxiety influencing us from the shadows, it becomes a conscious reality we can engage with productively. As Epictetus taught his students, I cannot escape death, but at least I can escape the fear of it. This perspective shift creates what psychologists call temporal scarcity, the awareness that time is your most precious, non-renewable resource. Research shows that perceived temporal scarcity significantly increases the subjective value of experiences, enhancing enjoyment and meaning. The practice becomes particularly powerful when combined with regular gratitude. While mortality awareness highlights life's finite nature, gratitude highlights its abundant richness. Together, they create a perspective of appreciative realism that neither denies limitations nor overlooks blessings. This brings us to our next habit, for when circumstances disappoint, the Stoics had a specific practice for transforming your emotional experience of the present. It's an exercise that Epictetus, who had been a slave and lived with physical disability, practiced daily, the deliberate expansion of gratitude. Imagine two men in exactly the same external situation, one miserable, the other content. What's the difference? The second is practicing what Epictetus called valuing what one has, rather than fixating on what's missing. When Epictetus taught this principle, remember that he had been a slave and lived with physical disability. Yet he wrote, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." His circumstances hadn't changed, but his relationship to them had transformed completely. This brings us to our 8th habit of mentally strong people, what I call active appreciation, the deliberate practice of focusing on what you have rather than what you lack. This isn't about denying difficulties or forcing toxic positivity. It's about perspective calibration, a deliberate widening of attention to include the good that exists alongside challenges. The neuroscience behind this practice is fascinating. Brain imaging studies using fMRI scans show that gratitude practice activates regions associated with dopamine and serotonin production, creating lasting changes in neural patterns related to positivity and stress resilience. One 2016 study found that participants who practiced specific gratitude exercises for 8 weeks showed measurable changes in brain activity even 3 months later. Notice the word specific in that research finding. This highlights a crucial distinction that makes the difference between ineffective and transformative gratitude practice. Generic gratitude, "I'm grateful for my health," has minimal impact compared to specific appreciation. "I'm grateful for the feeling of strength in my legs during my walk this morning." The specificity activates sensory memory and creates a fuller neural engagement. Amanda, who struggled with chronic comparison to others, began a daily practice of writing 3 specific things she appreciated about her current circumstances. "It hasn't changed my external reality," she notes, "but it's completely transformed how I experience that reality. I still face the same challenges, but they no longer consume my entire attention." Try this right now. Pause the video and name 3 specific aspects of your current situation. Not general blessings, but particular details of your life right now that you genuinely appreciate. Be as concrete and detailed as possible. Maybe it's the comfortable chair supporting you, a conversation that made you smile today, or even the reliable technology allowing you to watch this video. The specificity matters more than the significance. Did you notice a subtle shift in your emotional state? That's the immediate effect of directing attention toward appreciation. It's not that problems disappear, they simply stop monopolizing your mental landscape. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This practice is like training your attention muscle. Just as a physical muscle grows stronger with regular exercise, your capacity to notice what's good strengthens with practice. Most of us have a negativity bias, an evolutionary tendency to notice threats and problems more readily than opportunities and blessings. This made sense for survival when physical dangers were constant, but in modern life, this bias often creates unnecessary suffering. The Stoic approach to gratitude wasn't about ignoring difficulties. It was about maintaining a complete perspective that includes both challenges and advantages. As Seneca wrote, "We should not, with unreasonable fastidiousness, reject all things that do not suit our taste, nor should we greedily seize upon those which please us." This balanced awareness is the goal of active appreciation. A powerful way to implement this practice is through what I call the Specific Appreciation Journal. Each morning, write 3 particular aspects of your current reality you appreciate. Each evening, add 3 specific positive moments from your day. The key is extreme specificity. Not "I'm grateful for my friend," but I appreciate how my friend really listened when I explained my problem today. I was skeptical about gratitude practices until I made mine more specific. Instead of generic entries like my health, I began writing things like the feeling of sunlight through my window this morning, or the helpful email from a colleague I wasn't expecting. The specificity made the practice powerful in ways I hadn't anticipated. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical brain training. When you deliberately direct attention to specific positive aspects of your experience, you're creating neural pathways that become stronger and more automatic with repetition. Over time, you begin noticing positive elements without conscious effort, just as a trained musician hears subtleties in music that others miss. A common objection I hear is, but if I focus on the positive, am I just denying reality? This misunderstands the practice. Active appreciation isn't about ignoring problems, it's about correcting our tendency to ignore everything except problems. It's about seeing the complete picture rather than just the challenges. Another objection. Isn't this just putting on rose-colored glasses? Again, this misses the point. The practice isn't about distorting reality, but expanding awareness to include positive elements that are genuinely present but often overlooked. As Epictetus taught, it is not things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about those things. Sophia, who struggled with chronic dissatisfaction, noticed a surprising shift after 2 weeks of this practice. I haven't stopped wanting improvements in my life, she notes, but I've stopped being unhappy while pursuing them. I can simultaneously appreciate what is while working toward what could be. That's the difference. I'm no longer postponing contentment until some future condition is met. This points to a profound paradox the Stoics understood. You can be simultaneously satisfied with what is and motivated to improve. In fact, appreciation often fuels more effective action because you're operating from abundance rather than scarcity. As Marcus Aurelius advised himself, do not indulge in dreams of having what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess, and then thankfully remember how you would crave for them if they were not yours. The specific appreciation practice transforms 3 key areas: your baseline emotional state, your resilience during challenges, and your relationships with others. Your baseline emotional state shifts from what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, constantly pursuing the next satisfaction, to what they term appreciative joy, the ability to derive genuine pleasure from existing circumstances. Research shows this shift significantly impacts overall life satisfaction and even physical health markers. Your resilience during challenges improves because active appreciation builds psychological resources that buffer against stress. A 2015 study found that people who practice specific gratitude showed greater emotional recovery after negative events and maintained higher positive emotion even during difficulties. And perhaps most importantly, your relationships transform when you shift from focusing on what others aren't providing to appreciating what they are contributing. One study found that partners who expressed specific appreciation to each other reported 65% greater relationship satisfaction after just 3 weeks. For 4 days, develop systematic gratitude through this simple practice. Begin a specific appreciation journal. Each morning, write 3 particular aspects of your current reality you appreciate. Each evening, add 3 specific positive moments from your day. Note how this practice affects your baseline emotional state. The key to making this practice transformative rather than superficial lies in 3 elements: specificity, sincerity, and consistency. Specificity means focusing on concrete details rather than general categories. Sincerity means choosing things you genuinely appreciate rather than what you think you should be grateful for. And consistency means practicing regularly enough to create new neural pathways, ideally daily, for at least 3 weeks. This practice particularly shines during challenging periods. When facing difficulties, our attention naturally narrows to focus exclusively on problems. Active appreciation deliberately widens that focus to include the good that exists alongside challenges. As Epictetus taught his students, he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. I've found this especially valuable during periods of transition or uncertainty. When everything seems to be changing, deliberately noticing specific positive constants creates a sense of groundedness that makes navigating change easier. As Seneca wrote, "Things that were hard to bear are sweet to remember." The practice of specific appreciation allows us to find sweetness even in the bearing. What makes this practice so powerful is that it works regardless of your circumstances. You don't need to have achieved specific goals or acquired certain possessions to implement it effectively. As the Stoics recognized, there is always something to appreciate if we train our attention to find it. The distinction between gratitude as an emotion and gratitude as a practice is crucial. We can't directly control when we feel spontaneous gratitude, but we can establish practices that make that emotion more likely to arise. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." Another powerful aspect of this practice is how it changes your relationship with desire. Most of us live in what the Stoics would call a desire trap, believing that satisfaction lies in acquiring what we currently lack. Active appreciation reverses this pattern, teaching us to derive satisfaction from what we already have. This doesn't eliminate healthy aspiration, but it transforms the emotional quality of pursuing goals. Imagine implementing this practice consistently for a year. You'd have documented over 1,000 specific positive aspects of your experience. How might this systematic training of your attention transform your default perception of reality? Research suggests the changes would be both psychological and physiological, from improved mental health markers to strengthened immune function. For skeptics who doubt the power of something so simple, consider the research. Multiple studies show that specific gratitude practices reduce stress hormones like cortisol by up to 23%, increase sleep quality, reduce blood pressure, and even improve markers of heart health. The mind-body connection means that where attention goes, physical resources follow. Active appreciation also creates what psychologists call upward spirals, positive feedback loops where appreciation increases well-being, which in turn makes appreciation more accessible, creating an ongoing cycle of improvement. This contrasts with the downward spirals, where focusing on negatives increases stress, which further narrows attention to problems. As you develop this practice, you'll likely notice something surprising. Your desires don't disappear, but they hold less power over your happiness. You become capable of wanting things without needing them for your well-being. This is precisely what Epictetus meant when he said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." The practice becomes particularly valuable during periods of loss or limitation. When health challenges, financial constraints, or relationship difficulties arise, active appreciation provides a counterbalance to the mind's tendency to fixate exclusively on what's wrong or missing. It doesn't deny the challenge, but prevents it from consuming your entire emotional landscape. Remember that this practice isn't about comparing yourself favorably to others who have less. That creates separation rather than appreciation. It's about noticing the inherent value in your actual experience, independent of how it ranks against others. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." Start small, but be consistent. 3 specific appreciations daily is enough to begin rewiring neural patterns if practiced regularly. Over time, you may find yourself spontaneously noticing positive elements that previously would have passed unregistered beneath your awareness, a sign that the practice is becoming integrated into your default perception. When personal problems feel overwhelming, mentally strong people zoom out to what Stoics called the view from above, seeing their situation within the vast context of human experience and cosmic scale. This perspective shift technique is our next habit, and it might be the most powerful tool for instantly reducing the emotional grip of personal challenges. Have you ever noticed how problems that seem enormous when viewed up close appear tiny when seen from a distance? There's a reason we instinctively tell someone overwhelmed by a problem to take a step back or look at the big picture. This shift in perspective is not just a figure of speech. It's a powerful psychological tool that the Stoics mastered and used deliberately to maintain emotional equilibrium in the face of challenges. When personal problems feel overwhelming, mentally strong people zoom out to what the Stoics called the view from above, seeing their situation within the vast context of human experience and cosmic scale. I call this the cosmic perspective technique, and it might be the most immediate way to reduce the emotional grip of personal challenges. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly, writing, "Keep in mind how fast things pass by and are gone, those that are now and those to come. Existence flows past us like a river. Nothing is stable, not even what's right here." He wasn't being pessimistic. He was deliberately cultivating a perspective that prevented him from becoming consumed by momentary concerns. Think about your most pressing current problem. Maybe it's a conflict at work, a financial worry, or relationship tension. Now imagine viewing this situation from 1 year in the future, then from 10 years ahead. Then imagine seeing it from the perspective of someone on the other side of the world facing life-threatening challenges. Finally, imagine viewing your situation from 1,000 years in the future. Did you feel the shift? As your mental camera pulls back, problems that seem all-consuming when viewed up close naturally resize themselves. This isn't about dismissing legitimate concerns, it's about placing them in their proper proportion within the larger context of your life and the broader human experience. Studies on awe and transcendent experiences confirm the psychological power of this broader perspective. Research at the University of California found that experiencing awe, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends our understanding, reduced cytokines, inflammatory markers linked to depression, and increased feelings of connection and perspective. Simply put, regularly experiencing your place within something larger than yourself improves both psychological and physical health. Daniel, facing a business setback that felt catastrophic, practiced viewing his situation from progressively wider perspectives. "From sufficient distance, my disaster looked appropriately tiny," he explains. "This didn't solve my problem, but it right-sized my emotional response to it. I could still address the issue effectively without being consumed by it." This practice isn't abstract philosophy. It's a practical tool for immediate emotional regulation. When you feel overwhelmed by a situation, try this simple exercise. Place your hand a few inches from your face, so close that it blocks much of your vision. This represents how problems appear when we're mentally too close to them. Now slowly move your hand away until it becomes just one small element in your broader field of vision. This physical demonstration mirrors exactly what the cosmic perspective technique achieves mentally. The Stoics understood something profound about human psychology that modern research confirms. Our emotional response to situations depends less on the situations themselves and more on the perspective from which we view them. As Epictetus taught, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. The cosmic perspective deliberately shifts those views. This practice becomes particularly valuable during personal crises or periods of intense stress. When something feels like the end of the world, the cosmic perspective reminds us that the world has faced countless ends and beginnings. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "All that you see will soon perish. Those who witness this perishing will soon perish themselves." This might sound depressing at first glance, but those who practice it consistently report the opposite effect. There's something oddly comforting about recognizing that your problems, while significant to you, are just tiny threads in the vast tapestry of human experience. This recognition doesn't eliminate the need to address challenges, but it removes the excess emotional weight that makes addressing them effectively so difficult. Try this perspective shift right now with something that's been bothering you. First, acknowledge the challenge fully. Don't minimize or dismiss it. Then mentally begin to zoom out, seeing yourself from above, then your building, your neighborhood, your city, your country, the planet, the solar system, the galaxy. From this vast perspective, visualize your concern. Notice how your emotional relationship with it begins to shift. The cosmic perspective technique works through what psychologists call decentering, the ability to step outside your immediate experience and observe it from a distance. Research shows that this capacity significantly reduces rumination, getting stuck in repetitive negative thoughts, and increases cognitive flexibility. In simpler terms, it helps you stop obsessing and start problem solving. Consider how social media has amplified our tendency toward narrow perspective. Algorithms feed us increasingly personalized content that can make our individual concerns seem like the center of the universe. The cosmic perspective directly counteracts this narrowing, deliberately expanding our view beyond the personal to the universal. I've found this practice particularly helpful for dealing with criticism or social rejection. When someone's negative opinion feels devastating, I visualize the Earth from space, billions of people living countless interconnected lives, each with their own struggles, opinions, and perspectives. From that vantage point, the weight of any single person's judgment naturally diminishes to its appropriate size. This isn't about dismissing genuine feedback or avoiding responsibility. It's about maintaining emotional proportion so you can respond effectively rather than reactively. As Seneca advised, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The cosmic perspective helps distinguish between genuine problems and those inflated by our limited viewpoint. A powerful way to develop this habit is through what I call perspective journaling. When facing a significant challenge, write about it from 3 progressively wider perspectives. 1 year in the future, then from the viewpoint of humanity as a whole, then from a cosmic time frame of centuries. Notice how your language and emotional tone naturally shift as your perspective expands. The most common objection to this practice is, "But this doesn't actually solve my problem." This misunderstands its purpose. The cosmic perspective isn't meant to replace practical action, but to create the emotional space that makes effective action possible. When we're emotionally overwhelmed, our problem-solving abilities diminish significantly. By right-sizing our challenges, we regain access to our full cognitive resources. You can implement this practice formally through daily meditation or informally through perspective checks during stressful moments. Some people find physical reminders helpful, perhaps a photo of Earth from space on your desk or phone wallpaper. Whenever you notice yourself becoming emotionally overwhelmed by a situation, let this image trigger your mental zoom-out process. The cosmic perspective doesn't just change how you view problems, it transforms how you experience joy as well. When you regularly practice seeing your life within its larger context, ordinary moments take on extraordinary significance. A conversation with a loved one, a beautiful sunset, a moment of connection, these experiences become not just pleasant but profound when viewed as brief, precious moments in the vast flow of existence. Marcus Aurelius captured this dual awareness perfectly. Pass through this brief life as nature bids you. Make your landing gracefully, as you would when a ripe olive falls, thanking the tree that bore you and the earth that nurtured you. He recognized that our brief time here becomes more meaningful, not less, when viewed against the backdrop of eternity. This practice also develops what psychologists call temporal distancing, the ability to view current situations from a future perspective. Research shows that people who regularly consider how they'll view current problems years from now make better decisions and experience less acute stress during difficulties. They're less likely to sacrifice long-term well-being for short-term emotional relief. For example, when facing a difficult conversation you'd rather avoid, the temporal aspect of cosmic perspective helps you ask, 1 year from now, which will I regret more? The temporary discomfort of having this conversation or the lasting consequences of avoiding it? This future-oriented viewpoint often clarifies choices that seem ambiguous when viewed only through immediate emotional impact. The Stoics were masters of this temporal zooming. Seneca advised, "Let all your activity be directed to some object. Keep in mind the whole sweep of time and existence." This dual awareness, attending to the specific task at hand while maintaining awareness of its place within the broader context, characterizes the mentally strong person's approach to challenges. What makes this practice so powerful is its immediate accessibility. You don't need special equipment, dedicated time, or specific environments. The cosmic perspective is available whenever you remember to implement it, providing instant emotional regulation in the moment you need it most. Research on perspective taking reveals something fascinating. Our brains process information differently when we mentally shift viewpoints. When viewing situations from an expanded perspective, we activate brain regions associated with wisdom and insight, while deactivating areas linked to personal distress. This neurological shift explains why the same exact problem feels different when viewed from different perspectives. The mentally strong person doesn't wait for crises to practice this technique. They regularly zoom out during ordinary moments, maintaining a baseline awareness of their place within the larger human story and cosmic timeline. This consistent practice ensures the perspective is readily available when challenges arise. As you develop this habit, you may notice something surprising. Problems don't disappear, but your relationship with them fundamentally changes. Issues that once seemed identity-threatening become simply situations to be addressed. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The cosmic perspective transforms those reactions by transforming the viewpoint from which you experience events. This practice complements all the previous habits we've discussed. The morning preparation ritual anticipates challenges. The response gap creates space between triggers and reactions. Perspective reframing finds alternative viewpoints. Voluntary discomfort builds resilience. Present moment anchoring grounds you in now. Virtue-centered decisions provide clear guidance. Mortality awareness clarifies priorities. And active appreciation expands awareness of the positive. The cosmic perspective integrates all these by providing the ultimate context within which all experience unfolds. As we conclude our exploration of these 9 Stoic habits for mental strength, take a moment to reflect on which practices resonated most strongly with you. Remember that the goal isn't perfection, but progress. Not eliminating life's challenges, but developing better tools for navigating them. As Seneca wisely noted, "We are not given a short life, but we make it short, and we are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it." The 9 habits we've explored, morning preparation, response gap, perspective reframing, voluntary discomfort, present moment anchoring, virtue-centered decisions, mortality awareness, active appreciation, and cosmic perspective form a comprehensive system for developing genuine mental strength. Not the performative kind that crumbles under pressure, but the authentic resilience that withstands life's inevitable storms. Now that you understand these 9 habits, let's develop a practical implementation program, one that builds genuine mental strength without requiring hours of daily practice. Remember, the Stoics were practical people engaged with busy lives, not monks in isolation. Their methods were designed to work in the real world, just like yours.